Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to look at package management for MSPs and how it can be used for third-party patching. The ideas here will apply to any package management system, but towards the end we'll be looking at demos of our new brand and product in this space for MSP package management. A couple housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and we will have time for Q&A, and that's actually going to come at the middle of the webinar, so feel free to make use of that Q&A box. We're going to start with some background and then move into real world solutions, and be warned, the demo might run a little long, so it might go a few minutes over. So without further ado, let's get started. To get some introductions out of the way, I'm Jeremy, the founder of Automation Theory, and my firm specializes in MSP tool infrastructure maintenance and security. Before becoming an MSP vendor, I worked for an MSP in northern Minnesota, and I was the RMM admin there, managing about 10,000 endpoints. And package management is fairly different from our existing offerings. Some of you are existing Automation Theory clients and are familiar with some of our other offerings. So, in conjunction with our new product, we also created a new brand. That new product is called ThirdPatch, and we actually were able to secure the domain, thirdpartypatching.com, and we rolled this up into a new brand for marketing purposes. On the back end, it's 100% Automation Theory. We simply wanted to make life easier for MSPs searching Google for solutions. At this point, you might be wondering, why did we make a product for third-party patching? Well, I'm glad you asked. As mentioned in the introduction, I was an RMM admin back in the day. I was really struggling with third-party patching. I used an integration baked into my RMM, and I won't toss out any names to protect the guilty here, but it only handled about 25 applications, and it was flaky at best. And there were no real good logs for troubleshooting, and it was just overall a poor quality integration. One of the issues that we had with it, and this is more of a fun back origin story, it also happened to push the wrong architecture of Google Chrome, so it was deploying 32-bit versions on 64-bit operating systems, and there was an incident. I was out on PTO. I had some house projects blocked out for that day, including cleaning refrigerator coils on the back of my fridge, and as fate would have it, that did not happen. There was a bug in the WebRoot endpoint security software that MSP was using, and it caused web rendering to break on about 6,000 workstations. And I was the only RMM admin, so my phone started to ring. I was called in to fix the issue. Now, luckily, I had been given some leash previously to do some research and development, and we actually had a package server in place. So with some brute force RMM scripting, I actually redeployed Google Chrome to 6,000 endpoints in the middle of the day. That was quite the interesting exercise, as you can imagine. There was a fair amount of heartburn there, but we were able to do it with that infrastructure. And from that initial prototype I built at that MSP, we've created a new offering. And there are some mechanics worth mentioning that differentiate like what is a package-based system versus what is a traditional third-party patching integration or script-based solution. So let's take a look at that. So with a package in that scenario, I was able to send identical instructions to all 6,000 endpoints, and it was actually tracked on the endpoint itself if the upgrade was successful. And that creates item potency, aka safe to reuse automation. So if I told the same workstation to deploy Google Chrome twice, it was already there. It wasn't going to redeploy, re-interrupt that user. You know, you're force pushing software in the middle of the workday. That's a real nice feature to have. And that is, of course, overridable. You could replicate that to a certain degree with, a scripted solution. You can make a script check. Hey, is the software here? Is it, version X or Y or Z? But that is built into package managers for every single piece of software that they deploy. What's really powerful in a package management system is the ability to roll back software to the previous version. So in that scenario, yes, it's super slick to just use your RMM, push out software across thousands of devices. If I wanted to roll back to a specific version of Google Chrome, all of a sudden trying to put that into an RMM script and all the rest, that's a taller order, especially on short notice. But that is a one-liner with a package management system like ThirdPatch. The next thing worth noting with packages is that edge cases are easy to handle, and the MSP life is a case study in edge cases. For example, if you had a client line of business application and it was dependent on an older version of Adobe Reader for compatibility, we call it package tuning, where we can tell the package manager to lock in at a specific version. And then when you run an upgrade command, it's not going to go ahead and upgrade that package until you actually unlock that version. And so that way, you can have your cake and eat it too. If you want to skip third-party patching on one application, you can do that without a lot of pomp and circumstance. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But it also reduces the need for extraneous documentation or strange context awareness where you patch, Google Chrome, Adobe Reader, etc., the same way across all your clients, except for this set of machines at this client that can't do it because of that software dependency. So you exclude them from that, and depending on your existing setup, you have to do a fair amount of extra plumbing to get the other patches to deploy. Again, that's really context dependent how you use some of those tools. But then, always and forever, someone needs to be aware of the strange one-off software situation at this client and have documentation for that. But if you can just bundle it into how you deliver the software, while you still might document it, it doesn't become an operational stumbling block. And last but not least, package management system like ThirdPatch gives visibility on a couple fronts. First, it actually has good logging. So if something goes wrong with a package, we'll be able to tell why it failed. And secondly, as a package manager, it has a list of all of the software that it installed. So you as the MSP can look at a workstation and figure out what software are you managing on that device versus software that was installed by an end user or came from some other source. Before we go any farther, we should talk about what a package actually is. As far as what it's made out of, similar to online shopping, a package is a delivery box. It's a container for the things that you're actually concerned about. And there are some standard parts, along with some optional items that have the ability to make life a lot easier in the MSP world. So first up, we have the metadata. And this is an XML file, and it has things like your package name, the version, dependencies, and some other basic details. And that versioning is important, like we hinted at earlier, because you can roll back to a specific version. And so if you deploy an upgrade, then all of a sudden realize that this is having some adverse effects, well, quick one-liner, it rolls back to where it was before. Next up, we have the install instructions, and that's a PowerShell script. So anything you can do in PowerShell, you can also put inside a package. That comes into play when we're thinking about custom packaging, especially client line of business applications. Sometimes you might need to stop a service, or you want to back up an existing configuration or perform some other steps before you do that software upgrade. You can do that inside of a package quite nicely. You can also include files, and that is great for scenarios like you have a standard VPN client across a particular client site, and you want to both install it and deploy a VPN config. You can bundle that into the package. Likewise, transform files for MSIs if you're doing more advanced software installs or line of business apps that need license files or things like that. You can go ahead and include that in the package. And once upon a time, this is kind of an edge use case, but it highlights the functionality perfectly. I was tasked as the RMM admin to go ahead and take care of this client request. They were a very small client. They didn't have any centralized infrastructure, but they wanted to deploy Office templates to their devices. And if you think about doing this in an RMM script, yeah, you'll go ahead, you'll upload these files somewhere, you'll make a script, you'll download the files into the public desktop folder. But in the back of my head, I had a hunch that, okay, if we do this for them, we're going to need to maintain it until the end of time. And so, and my hunch was actually correct. But initially, I went ahead and made a package, just had all the files, copied it with some PowerShell into the public desktop. And then, sure enough, a month later, they came back and said, hey, we want to update these templates. And so I was able to put the new templates into the package, stage the package, update the version, and then next time those machines did third-party updates, they got the new templates too. So that is a very interesting sleight of hand that you can do with some of that automation. Like we touched on with the install script, you can also have instructions specifically for upgrades. And that can be very handy, especially for custom line of business software that can be a little bit more finicky. That can really vary across the verticals that you support. I've seen my fair share of verticals, everything from banking software and Jack Henry clients to dental software is notorious. If you support any chiropractic firms, ChiroTouch is known for being an interesting piece of software. I also think back to if you have any hotels, there's an awful lot of software back end that goes into the reservation client software. So all of that can be very, very fuzzy. And we can all of a sudden, when we're upgrading, we can count for all that. And the same thing with the removal instructions. And all of that gets compressed into a NuGet file, which is a flavor zip file, basically. And voila, you have a package. So now that we've covered what a package is, let's go over how MSPs can use them to control the chaos and make life a little bit easier. If a package is a delivery box that contains instructions, what's the advantage for MSPs? The answer boils down to how packages can stack. So go back to our shipping box analogy. When you make a large online order, you get all the individual product boxes inside one shipping box. And you can track everything in the shipment via that single box. That's what has the shipping label, the tracking number, etc., etc. And so everything is going to arrive at once as long as the box arrives in, one piece. You'll find horror stories online about shipping providers and boxes just being ripped in half and all the rest. But barring that, it's all going to arrive in one piece. And most existing third-party patching solutions are delivering those updates one app at a time. So you have 25 things in your Amazon shopping cart, and 25 boxes show up. Package management, we shove it into one box, and you start to get some economies of scale. And that management lends itself to other helpful methodologies, including reusable baselines. So we'll go ahead and see this in our live demo, but to preface, the idea is that you create groups of software that click together like Lego blocks. So if your MSP has a standard configuration or set of software, helper utilities, OS settings, registry values, you can put that into one package, which would be your global MSP baseline. Then you can have other packages, whether that's your security software, things like that. And those can take parameters for client install tokens, things like that. So if you're DNS filtering, EDR, etc., phone's home with that little installer token, you can go ahead and do that as a package. And you could put all of that into a client-specific package. And so then all you do, you deploy that client package, then all of those secondary dependencies come with it. And if you standardize your naming conventions between your RMM and your packages, all of a sudden you can tuck all that into your onboarding script inside your RMM, and it'll all roll out as one install command. All of a sudden you are deploying your global configs, the client software, and line of business apps the same way that you deploy browsers and PDF viewers and productivity suites. Now, in this scenario, imagine that there is a 0 day. Let's say that you have a standard firewall, standard VPN client, and it's here in the automation theory realm. We have written blogs about what we call the 0 day world. It seems like each day you have a new vulnerability and it's just a fire drill for the standard MSP. Obviously, MSPs have gotten good at doing this, but there can still, depending on the particulars, there can be a fair amount of scrambling to get new software out there, things like that. And so normally you'd use your RMM to identify the outdated devices, create a script, and then push it out to that group of devices continuously until you get everything patched. With a package-based system, assuming that you've got a mechanism to trigger your package updates, which we'll get to later in the webinar here, all you need to do is take that new VPN client, take that installer, put it into the package, increment the version, and upload it, and then all of your machines are going to pull down that software when the package manager kicks in. That gives you the best of both worlds, where it'll pull down automatically, but you can also, with your RMM, just run the package manager command, and you can make that machine push it. In that way, the machine will be forced to upgrade its packages. So, with that, let's see this in action. We'll move into our live demo here. To get things started, we are just going to install ThirdPatch. And it is this blob of PowerShell. And we have a few parameters up here at the top. So the client slug is going to point to your ThirdPatch instance. There's an option in the installer to discover applications. I'm going to set that to true. And then there's this run custom switch, which we're also going to set to true. And we'll explain what all that does in some following slides and demos. But this is the install command, and you would put this into your RMM. And there are a couple of other options for a site name and location name, and those will go ahead and tie into some of the more advanced automations that we can do with ThirdPatch. At this point, it has just finished running the custom install script there, and I would go back and show you, but the console output might fight me. So it also installed ThirdPatch upgrade on boot, and this is one other default package that we have out in our ecosystem. I shouldn't say default package, it's a package that we maintain. And it just creates a scheduled task to run ThirdPatch when a machine boots up. And when we think about ideal deployment methodologies, since most RMMs are already taking care of Windows patching, when that machine goes ahead and reboots to finish its Windows update, it will go ahead and then run its third-party updates. And so that is typically the smoothest way to integrate in ThirdPatch into your existing update process without interrupting users and things like that. And there is a question here in the chat about non-English packages and languages. And by and large, yes, you can definitely do that. That's actually for anyone who's supporting environments with other languages, that's actually a very common issue. We work with an organization who's the ConnectWise distributor over in Germany, and they have issues where with the existing third-party integrations, they'll deploy Firefox and then it all of a sudden is in English, and when your browsers are in a language that your users don't speak, that's a very interesting support ticket. So yes. Now that is package dependent, and that might be worth, let me go ahead and move over a browser tab here, and we can talk about some packages. Over here on the third-party patching website, we have a little link at the top for packages, and when you click that, it'll bring you to our package gallery. By default, this page is going to be rather blank. It remembers packages you've recently looked at, but you can go ahead and search for packages. You can go ahead and pick on Chrome, and it gives you some basic details about it. You can see versions and things like that. My browser has cached this. There are definitely newer versions out here, but it gives you some details. And if you look at, so Adobe Reader is a great example. There are definitely install parameters And in the package description, it tells you that it will not install a desktop icon and things like that. And I forgot to mention that in our actual demo over here. I don't think I've refreshed. So I have some old software out here. We've got TeamViewer 8. We've got Adobe Reader 11. It's been a while since they've done Roman numeral numbering there. We've also got an old version of Google Chrome. We will see how all this goes. In the background, this is our application discovery process, and we'll go back to the package parameters there. But as you can see, it has detected that, oh, hey, we've got Microsoft Edge on this machine. That's just default in Windows 11. You can see it's got OneDrive flagged as being installed. Here, it's jumping us to TeamViewer 15. You can see the icon just swapped on us there. And hey, our install process is done. So just to bounce back here, you can go ahead and see that there are a number of switches. And you can also download packages. As mentioned, these are NuGet packages, and you can extract them with 7-zip. Let's say there's a community package that you like, but you need to make one tweak for it, or that client X needs a custom version of the Adobe Reader installer. You can go ahead and download the package, unzip it, customize it, upload it to your repository. Now you've got your flavor of Adobe Reader. And let's see, it looks like there is one question in the Q&A, and that is, if you're using a ConnectWise Automate cloud-hosted instance, no backend server, how would this integrate? And the good news is that it integrates exactly like you saw. Part of our service, we take care of the repository and all the rest, and so it is purely a SaaS application from the end user perspective. It's compatible with any RMM that can run shell commands or any other management agent. We'll talk about that later, but sometimes your EDR software can run shell commands. So if you're ever trying to help a client recover from a scenario and you need to deploy tools for like insurance or forensics purposes, you can go ahead and actually package that up and then deploy it through ThirdPatch. And so if your EDR can run a shell command, ThirdPatch, upgrade, insurance forensic analysis agent, voila. You can push that out into an infected environment and get the forensics teams out and in there to help your client recover from that scenario. Up next, we talked about the idea of global baselines and some client-specific packages. So it went real quick in the install process. There was, in our custom.ps1 file, which appears on a slide later in the deck, we have some additional repositories added. So I'm going to go ahead and run a command on this machine. I'm actually going to zoom in so this is a little bit easier for everyone to see. We're going to run the command ThirdPatch upgrade Acme Inc. architects. And the idea here is that Acme Inc. is an architecture firm, and you have both normal, office users, and then you have architects who need additional software for their role. And so we're going to hit go, and this is an example of a stacked package. Inside of this, it has our client baseline, our MSP baseline, and the software for the architects. And it does all the dependencies first. And so you can see that it installed LeechBit, it is installing background info, and now it's running the MSP global package. We'll come back to that. And it's also doing some other dependencies. And so with a package in the ecosystem, if it needs a version of the .NET framework, or it depends on a certain KB to be installed on certain operating systems, by and large, in a well-constructed package, that will be automatically resolved for you. And so now it's starting to process the applications in the just Acme Inc. base package, including Microsoft Teams and Fox the Reader. You can also deploy Office 365. And again, if you use the customization tools for Office to deploy to your clients, that would be a great example of something that you would put into a custom package. You have the Office deployment utility, the config file, and then voila, you could push that out through ThirdPatch. And then if you ever made changes to that Office deployment, you'd update the config file, you'd update your package, and then you'd redeploy through ThirdPatch with the upgrade command, and it would then rerun the Office deployment tool with the new config file. So one other thing worth noting just about package behavior is that it does check the file hash of all of the executables it downloads. It's going to circle back to this later. So when it tried to download sysinterns, it actually got an error that the hash was not what it expected. So by default for security, it's not going to install this. The message here shows you both hashes, and it gives you the idea you can either ignore the hash or you can go ahead and supply your own. And typically what this is that a new version of the application came out and the package has not been updated yet. So this typically resolves itself within a day or two. You, of course, have the option to go ahead and make your own package or override the deployment on the command line. And where this actually really comes into play a lot is with Google Chrome. You may or may not have noticed in the package description on the gallery about how Google does it. You have one download for Google Chrome, and it's one MSI. When they release a new version, they swap out what that URL points to. But you're never actually going to get a prior version of Google Chrome. And so when Google releases an update, the package, it does update very, very quickly. But if it was one of those, oh, hey, a 0-day was announced today, and there's a lag in the package, it's still going to download and install from that URL, so you will get the new version of Chrome. But in that scenario, you might need to go ahead and use one of these options. We're now moving on to the actual architecture software proper. And so we are downloading AutoCAD at the moment. And there is a question in the chat about, do you have to redeploy an app to have ThirdPatch patch it? And the answer is no. Although by default with the application discovery, it does. With a package manager, there's one important paradigm, that is, package manager is aware of what it's deployed, and it's not really aware of the rest of the machine. For example, let's say I go ahead and deploy a specific version of a browser through ThirdPatch, and then a tech remotes onto that machine, goes to the website, and downloads an installer, and installs a newer version of the browser. The package manager is still using its metadata to see that, oh, hey, version X is installed, and from that, based on our other instructions to the package manager, that's how it's going to manage that piece of software. To get a piece of software into the package manager, you need to deploy the package. Now, you can add a switch to the package install process and tell it not to run the install command. So it will only import the metadata into the package manager. And so that gets around the, do I need to install it? And we'll cover this later on in the architecture ThirdPatch, because MSPs have such a variety of needs. We designed the architecture to be very, very flexible. And so you can create your own copy of that discovery script, put it into your custom deployment script, and then voila, you can have your own version that does not deploy the software at discovery time. And that is a backlogged feature request that we're going to add support for. It's important to note that when that package goes ahead and installs, that metadata gets imported, it's going to lock on to the version of the package, not what's on the machine. So if you discover a machine with an outdated version of Chrome, the package will detect that, oh, hey, the latest Chrome package exists on this machine. And so it won't do the upgrade until the next version of the package is released. That is a little nuance there. And so there are a number of ways that you might work around that, and that's really going to be context specific for how your MSP operates. ThirdPatch product, we offer consultative support through that. You can both put in a ticket to our support team and say, hey, I'm having issues with X, can you help me? You can also put in tickets that says, hey, we're trying to wrap our heads around what's the best way to approach this situation. And under the regular service umbrella, we're happy to help with both sets of questions. That is something that we are very much willing to work through on an individual basis, but I don't want to give a one-size-fits-all answer without knowing the context there. How does licensing work? That's a great question. We do address this later on, but ThirdPatch is a flat rate service. There is no additional cost per endpoint or per application. And we have 3 different tiers of ThirdPatch, and that is very much designed to find the right size fit. We work with MSPs of all shapes and sizes, from 1 and 2 man consulting shops with a few hundred devices, all the way up to MSPs with 20,000 endpoints. And the needs just in the spectrum of MSP size and shape are different. So we have those tiers. What you're seeing today, and we'll cover this towards the end, this is our pro tier, which is the middle tier, which is what we'd recommend for most MSPs. If your MSP doesn't need all of the nuanced deployment automation, we've got a lighter tier. And our enterprise tier is still in development, and we're actually in the process of hiring on a developer to plumb out some of the additional reporting features, things like that. And it's not released yet because I don't believe in releasing half-baked MSP products. I use far too many of those to inflict that upon anybody else. With that, you can see that our install process here is done. And so ThirdPatch upgraded 12 out of 13 packages. 1 failed. That was just internals because the hash didn't match. And voila. If we go back to our control panel, currently there were 7 apps pre-installed. And if we refresh, ta-da, we now have 26 applications installed. And you can see it updated Adobe, it updated TeamViewer, although the old control panel entry is still here. Google Chrome is now at its latest version. And then it installed AutoCAD and all the accessories. It installed KiCad and our Microsoft Teams client. And obviously, in a real world scenario, you tuck in the rest of the Office 365 suite, all the other productivity apps, Zoom clients, things like that. Moving on, if we do a quick check here, you'll notice that we, in our MSP baseline package, included a little desktop shortcut using a awesome icon. And the point of this demonstration is not for me to trip over the ancient software I installed demo, but rather to go ahead and show that, okay, this URL is going to thirdpartypatching.com. Now, let's say we wanted to make a change to our global MSP baseline. Let's say I wanted to change that URL, and I wanted to go ahead and update that to point to something else. In order to go ahead and do that, we need to update the package. And so I, in the background, will go ahead and get the package updated here, log into the environment to access my repository. And now we'll go ahead and do a patch upgrade. And it says that we have MSP Global 1.0 installed, and 1.1 is available based on our sources. It'll go hard at work deploying that. You'll notice that sysinternals is part of our baseline, and so that package is still under the weather. We see that error again, but it successfully installed our new version. So now if we relaunch this shortcut, now we go to gallery.thirdpatch.com. Just like that, we can go ahead and do this with registry settings. We can do this with VPN clients. Or as, for example, all of a sudden Microsoft throws us a curveball and says, hey, we need to go ahead and make changes to update secure boot certificates, or we need to go ahead and deploy XYZ setting across the board for our MSP's preference for power management or anything like that. You can include that in the global baseline, and when the global baseline changes, you upload it to one central place, and all the machines pull it down. That is the traditional automation power of those sort of global overarching packages. It's also worth noting that we can go ahead and specify specific versions. And we talked a little bit earlier about maybe you have a line of business software that needs an older version. Let's go ahead and deploy Firefox, and we'll deploy version 144.0.2, which is a handful of versions behind. We're up to 149 Firefox, I believe. And sure enough, we will faithfully get Firefox deployed. And ThirdPatch has a command built into it called outdated. It will go ahead and compare packages against sources, and it will tell you what's outdated. And so, sure enough, we've got 144 and 149 is available. So if someone or the scheduled task we installed at deployment ran the ThirdPatch upgrade command, it would upgrade to the latest version. In the scenario of a line of business app where we just don't want that to happen, we don't want the client's machine to go ahead and upgrade versions and break on reboot, we can go ahead and issue a pin command. So we'll tell it to add a pin for the package named Firefox. And then voila, it says it's pinned. So if I do an upgrade, it says that we've got ThirdPatch for this version of Firefox installed. A version is available, but it's pinned, so it's going to skip the package. And so, ta-da, we've upgraded 0 out of 24 packages. Everything else is up to date. And it will still show in the outdated output here, but it will, under pinned, it is now true that we have this pinned. If we do want to upgrade Firefox, first things first, we just need to remove the pin. And then we can go ahead and run the upgrade command, and it will faithfully get Firefox up to version 149. And you might remember how we talked about in the intro of the webinar that, oh hey, we can roll back software. Here is a prime example of that. So let's say we upgrade an app, and then we get a panic call from the client, something doesn't work, we do some troubleshooting, we trace it back to, okay, it's this third-party application, we need to roll it back, or maybe it's their line of business application. We pushed out an update for them, and they realize there's some issue and we need to walk that back. Well, we can issue it's a kind of strange logic in the syntax, we can tell it to do an upgrade, specify a version, and then tell it to allow downgrade, and it'll go. Firefox has this one perk where there are browser profiles, so it's actually going to splash a little message to us that there is a profile created with a previous version here. That does happen after the install process, and so it would not break in the RMM automation sense, but since we're doing this here in the GUI, we do have that little message. So voila. And now we are back down to that version of Firefox, and last but not least, you run that outdated command, you can see that we are back to the old version of Firefox. Here is our install, one chunk of PowerShell. Here are those on the screen, those repositories we added. Line 5. If a device identifier in the install script is specified, we tell it to run ThirdPatch upgrade device identifier -base. That's just back to that custom naming convention. If we go ahead and standardize the names that we deploy with, along with the way we name our packages, inside that custom script, you can pull down those baselines. That is what will make it touchless and automatic. As you saw in our demo, we installed one package, and we ended up getting 8 applications from 3 different packages, plus all of their additional dependencies, as you saw in the control panel there. So this is where a little bit of architecting can really come into play, and this can really help with upgrade and replacement scenarios. If you're switching from AutoCAD to something else, you swap some dependencies around, you add an uninstall command in the base package, and then voila, it deploys the new version of CAD, yanks the old, you just upload that to your repository. You could even reboot the machine if you have that upgrade on boot package installed, and voila, upon reboot, it swaps all their software. You could also send that upgrade command from your RMM if you wanted to kind of push rather than have the machine pull it. And you should talk about that RMM integration. ThirdPatch is RMM neutral. So if your RMM, EDR, anything else can run shell commands, you can deploy packages with ThirdPatch. On the slide here, we have an example from Connect with Automate. You can see highlighted in red, we have those device identifiers added as script variables. And the astute observer will note in that script that there's some name normalization coming along. If anyone has had the unpleasant experience of having a client with special name or special characters in their name, things like apostrophes or ampersands or stuff like that, it can cause some automation heartburn. So normalizing those names, highly recommended. Beyond that, if a client ever changes names, you can just swap to a new package with the existing package as a dependency. And so it's very flexible from that perspective. And also with RMMs, you can have generic package deployment scripts if your RMM supports parameters. When I was on the MSP side, I just had a script called package deploy, and the users at our MSP who are doing cloud support, they get a ticket that says, hey, can you deploy Foxit Reader to all my machines? They right click in the RMM, run script, and then they pop in Foxit Reader, hit go, voila, deploys. For those sort of software push scenarios, it's actually real handy to do an ad hoc push because you don't need your RMM admin to configure it. And if we take a look at that, let's say you get a ticket to install Firefox on a single machine. What's the difference between having a tech go to the website and download it versus use the package? It's the ongoing maintenance and management, of course. And packages are tracked on the endpoint. So even if someone's at an on-site visit, there's no ticket, nothing like that, the end user just grabs your fearless tech and says, hey, can you install this on my machine? It's not done through the existing integration. As long as you use the package manager, it'll always and forever know that that's there, be tracked, be updatable. And co-managed clients actually can see a lot of advantages from this, essentially a free value add for them from your MSP. They can deploy software through your package manager. And it's a win-win because they're deploying your standard packaged config. It's not some kind of strange one-off. I know sometimes relationships with co-managed clients can be a little tough to navigate. They want a little bit more leash, and you as the MSP want to make sure that you're aware of what's going on in the environment and don't want to let them run wild. And so having a shared set of tools like a package manager is very, very handy. It works great until someone updates something that they shouldn't, which brings us to PIN. Obviously, we saw that through the demo. And again, this is great for those scenarios where you want to upgrade the third-party apps at client X, except for these machines where Google Chrome needs to be left unpatched for client XYZ because their machines are controlling some line of business equipment, which depends on a prehistoric version of your browser, which the vendor requires, and that vendor is known for questionable software. You're never going to change the line of business apps that your clients have, but with package management systems, we can all of a sudden work around some of these friction points. And pinning the package fixes all of that. One thing that we touched on that we should circle back to is the architecture for ThirdPatch. So the ThirdPatch client, ThirdPatch.exe, which you saw, it's agentless. It's just an executable sitting on the machine. There's no persistent connection to the cloud, and there's no way to access the workstation via ThirdPatch. And we really like that model from a security perspective. Our other MSP services are very cybersecurity focused. Our product lines defend MSPs against zero-day vulnerabilities. And so it is very much a different paradigm for most MSP tools, which you deploy yet another agent to keep track of and all the rest. But it's unrivaled from a security architecture perspective, and we really like it that way. ThirdPatch introduces a double caching architecture. You as the MSP have a repository, your custom packages live there, and the community packages, browsers, PDF readers, things like that, they're cached on your repository, but they point at the ThirdPatch mirrors. And the ThirdPatch mirrors cache the upstream community. So this creates this double buffer, which is good from a reliability perspective, and it's also a security hedge. So let's say that there's a scenario like, oh hey, like CCleaner had a supply chain vulnerability years back, or more recently, Notepad++ was actually hacked by nation-state actors. We can go ahead and use our mirror to block such bad packages and prevent that from proliferating downstream into MSP repositories. Obviously, if we find that out after the fact, like, oh hey, versions from X to Y from the past 8 months have had issues, those might already be cached. And so there's still some diligence that goes into this, but you really do control the supply chain when you have a caching repository. And that architecture is part of our Pro plan. And I know we touched on this. So we've got 3 tiers of ThirdPatch, and today we did see the Pro plan. It includes everything you saw. The Essentials plan doesn't have that repository, so if you're MSP, really you don't deal with a lot of line of business applications, and you've got just a lot of clients with SaaS apps, and you're concerned about browsers and PDF readers and things like that, you don't need all the deployment automation. The Essentials plan is for you. Enterprise is still under development. It includes some reporting options, along with a package development as part of that subscription, which is available as an add-on. So if you want our team to package software for you, we can. That's $119 a month additionally, and you can leverage us to do that. Last but not least, we do offer guided onboarding. That's flat $500. So if you want help getting ThirdPatch into your RMM, we can do that for you. That is the flat rate. So this brings us to our scheduled Q&A section. thirdpartypatching.com is where you can find us. And the trial registration button is at the bottom of the website. That is free, no credit card required. We'll ask for a couple details and to sign the terms of service. And you have a full 30 days to test out ThirdPatch in your environment. We do have one question, and that is, can we show the web UI? So here we are in the web interface. And you can see that we have repositories out there. We have those global apps, MSP Global, here are those two versions. To go back out, we have the client-specific repository where we have the Acme Inc. architects and the Acme Inc. base. And if we drill into packages like this, we can see the name, some details about it, the file hashes, and it locks onto. There are names and descriptions in there that you can view from the UI here. And there are a couple different types of repositories. So packages go in the NuGet repository. And you also see that there are some raw repositories, and those are just basically flat files. Under setup, this is where a custom.ps1 lives. And if you needed a place to upload files, either for your packages or for something else, you can upload them into this raw repository, and then you just have this straight download URL that you can use in those automations. In the community repository, this is the cache version from upstream. And so you can see with AutoCAD, here is that actual AutoCAD package. I know with KiCad, there were actually a couple different versions that were released over the time we were prepping for the webinar. And you can see those old versions are stored here. So if all of a sudden version 10.0.1 caused issues and we needed to roll back to this prior version, you saw it. That is a one-liner to go back there. Beyond that, there is also a search function. So if you start to go ahead and get lots of custom client packages, lots of third-party apps, and you're just trying to quick find out, all right, where is the package I'm looking for Acme Inc. You can do a quick search. You also see that you get all the historic versions. And so it tells you the repositories, and you can start to look at it, all the rest. All right, we will wrap up here. Thank you all so much for coming today. And hopefully we will talk with you soon.